What's up everyone, Dimitri here. In this video, I'm going to do a complete breakdown of Michael Jordan's shooting form. I'll show you MJ's footwork, what his set point and release were like, what fingers he shot with, how he gripped the ball, and more. All the pieces of the jump shot of one of the greatest to ever play the game. Let's dive in. Let's start with MJ's footwork and shot prep. Now, most of the time, MJ was shooting off the dribble, so I'm going to show you his footwork and how he got into his shot for his pull-up jumper specifically. Most of the time, MJ went into his pull-up with a 1-2 step. When he drove to the right, MJ went left foot, right foot, pull. When he drove to the left, MJ's last two steps were right and then left. The width of his feet before takeoff was pretty wide, wider than shoulder width. Now this is pretty interesting. You may have noticed how his knee is caving in before pulling up into his shot. Kobe did this too, and I've seen other players do it, but not to the extent that MJ and Kobe did. The knee that caves in is always the non-planting foot. So when MJ drove to the right, he planted with his left foot, and his right leg was the one that caved in. And then when he drove to the left, his right foot or inside foot was the one that planted, and his left leg caved in. Why does he do this? I'm honestly not 100% sure, but I do have a theory, and it ties in with the wide stance I just showed you. As Jordan is about to pull up, he takes a wide stance, wider than shoulder width. But look at his upper body in relation to his lower. Look at his center of gravity. Jordan is well balanced over his knees, not over his feet, but over his knees. With this wide stance that he takes, if Jordan didn't let his knee cave in, if he had his right knee over his right foot, it'd be out here. And that would be an extremely awkward position to jump from and rise up from in order to shoot. Well, this still seems like an awkward position to jump and rise up from, but yeah. It's almost like his knee caves in order to counterbalance that wide stance and make it a slightly easier stance to shoot from. But then the question becomes, why take that wide stance in the first place? And I'm really not sure the answer to that one. Could MJ just take less wide of a stance? Instead of swinging his right foot out so far wide here, couldn't he just bring it to shoulder width apart, right under his right hip and right shoulder? Absolutely. To me, that'd be easier and way less of an injury risk. But who am I to question a GOAT? So yeah, that's really the only explanation I could think of as to why Michael's outside knee always caved in on his pull-up jumpers. Last part of Jordan's shot preparation, his gather. I mentioned his footwork before pulling up into his mid-range is either left-right or right-left, depending on which way he's driving. The other part of this is that last dribble. MJ takes a strong pound dribble and gets down low to go get it. He gathers the ball a little below his waist. This is the start of his shot here. He is fully locked and loaded, fully engaged and ready to pull up. He's got his legs bent, he's leaning forward, he's low. Not only does this last pound dribble sell it like he's going to keep driving to the basket, but he uses the momentum of it to rise up into the air. He straightens out his upper body and his legs, and then fires. Alright, next, let's take a look at how Jordan held the ball. MJ has massive hands, and you can see just how much of the ball they cover. Even so, MJ has the ball up on his fingers. You can see the empty space here between his palm and the ball. As far as positioning, MJ's got his shooting hand centered on the ball, and he's got his guide hand over to the side of the ball. Because he has such huge hands, his fingers on his guide hand curl in front of the ball a little bit. Later on, I'll show you why that isn't a huge deal, but I'll leave it at that for now. Last thing I want to point out with MJ's grip. he's got his fingers spread wide and also across the seams, which in game action, you're not always going to be able to find the seams perfectly, but he made it a point to do this whenever possible. And here's another angle showing MJ spreading his fingers wide on the ball. Alright, now that MJ has gathered the ball and gripped it how he wants, it's time to raise the ball to his set point. Your set point refers to the brief pause in your shot right after you're done raising the ball into the air and right before you actually start to shoot the ball up and forward. Good mechanics at your set point make it easier to get good arc and good accuracy on your shot, which is why your set point is so important. Let's start with the location of Jordan's set point, and then I'll break down his actual form in this position. MJ has a high set point. He's got the ball well above his head here. This allows him to shoot over taller defenders and really get his shot off whenever he wants. When shooting set shots, MJ didn't bring the ball up as high, and this allows for a quicker release. But in the mid-range, he really brought that ball up high, and that allowed him to shoot over anybody. Let's look at MJ's form at his set point now. I'll start with his hands. He still has his guide hand on the side of the ball. As for his shooting hand, his right hand, he's got it underneath the ball, and he's got his palm facing up and back. Getting your hand under the ball and your palm facing up or back at your set point contributes to the arc of your shot. Now, MJ really doesn't get the best arc on most of his shots, and I'll show you why in a little bit, but he does do these two things well. And he's able to achieve this palm facing back at his set point, by flexing his wrist back, and also by lifting his elbow. And if we look at it from earlier in his shot, Jordan starts his shot with his wrist already flexed, and as he raises up to his set point, he keeps that wrist flexed. I've mentioned this in other videos, but some players like to start their shot with their wrist already flexed, like MJ here, while other players flex their wrist as they raise the ball to their set point, Jason Tatum being one of them. So he has his wrist flexed, and then a byproduct of raising the ball up so high above his head is that his elbow is going to come up too. His elbow is lifted and passed parallel with the floor, which isn't an issue. The most important thing is that his elbow is in and facing the basket when he reaches his set point. When your elbow is in and facing your target, it is easier to shoot straight. You're going to be more accurate and more consistent this way. Now, an interesting thing about MJ's shooting elbow, I mentioned you want your elbow in and facing the basket by the time you reach your set point, which means it really doesn't matter which way it's facing or whether it's in or not when you start your shot. When MJ starts his shot, his elbow is actually flared out a little. You just need the elbow in here at your set point, because from here, that's when you're going to actually shoot the ball. And that's exactly what MJ does. As he raises the ball from his shot pocket to his set point, he brings his elbow in, and now he has a straight shot right to the basket. His hands, his wrist, his elbow. Last thing I want to mention about MJ's form at his set point, his shoulders. Two things. His shoulders are parallel with each other at his set point. As he raises up to his set point, he brings both shoulders up together evenly, not dipping one shoulder below the other. And the second thing is his shooting shoulder, his right shoulder, is more forward than his left shoulder. It's closer to the basket. You can tell because look at his chest. Look at the numbers on his jersey. They're facing us right now. His body is turned diagonally to the left, putting his shooting shoulder more forward than his left, and in a straight line to the basket. When your shooting shoulder is forward, it creates a nice straight line down the shooting side of the body. The ball, hand, wrist, elbow, and shoulder are all in a straight line and facing the basket. Again, this makes it much easier to shoot the ball straight on a consistent basis. All it takes is extending the elbow straight towards the basket, flicking the wrist, and that ball is going to go straight every time. Alright, so then from the set point, it's time to release the ball. Take a look at MJ's guide hand first. Remember earlier when I showed you how he holds the ball, and because his hands are so big, his fingers are wrapping around the front of the ball. Well, watch how his fingers and guide hand come completely off the ball before he releases. He removes his left hand from the ball, and now he's free to shoot without any guide hand interference, without any interference from his fingers. His left thumb isn't involved in his release either. It doesn't influence the trajectory of the ball in any way. His guide hand is only there to control the ball as he lifts it from his gather to his set point. From there, the actual shooting of the basketball is done by the shooting hand and the shooting hand only. Speaking of the shooting hand, I want to show you how MJ snapped his wrist. It actually varied. Sometimes he would do a full snapping motion, where his fingers end up curled and facing towards the ground. And in these instances, he also fully extended his shooting arm. The lighting is tough on this one, but you can see the full extension of the arm at least. But other times, he did this sort of half snap motion. His fingers didn't finish curled, but more straight and facing forward. And he didn't fully extend his arm on these releases. No matter what though, he always kept his fingers spread as he released the ball, just like how he had them when he first began his shot. Last thing with his shooting hand, MJ said himself that he wanted to shoot the ball with his index finger, middle finger, and thumb.
These are the three fingers that you're going to shoot the basketball with.
And here's what that looks like. As he snaps the ball forward, the majority of the force is coming from his index and middle finger. Here it is again. See how his index and middle finger are snapping forward? And if I pause it here, you can see that his middle finger is the last to leave the ball because, well, it's the longest finger. But he's applying the most force with that index and middle finger together. Next, his shooting elbow on the release. Now, when it comes to your shooting elbow on your release, the biggest thing to look for is how high the elbow finishes. The higher the elbow finishes, the more arc you're going to get on your shot. The lower the elbow finishes, the more forward and flat the shot is going to be. Watching through a lot of these clips, there were quite a few where MJ really wasn't getting that much arc. And sure enough, a big reason for that was because he wasn't getting his elbow up on his release. It went more forward than up. The level of the eyes are a good reference point. If you get your elbow to finish as high as your eyes or higher, then that's an indication that you're going to get good arc on your shot. Take a look at the height of MJ's elbow on these. It doesn't mean he can't or won't make the shot, it just means he was shooting more of a flat shot. Last part of MJ's release, his legs. Earlier I showed you how MJ bends his knees as he's gathering the ball, and then as he rises up to shoot, he straightens his legs. But when it came to his mid-range pull-up, MJ sometimes added a little flair with his legs too. Sometimes he kicked his legs out wide, sometimes to the side, and sometimes he kicked his right leg forward. This leg action is what gave his shot that signature Jordan look. His guide hand, shooting elbow, and legs. This is everything that contributed to MJ's release. Alright, last thing, the timing of his release. MJ had some crazy hang time on some of his pull-ups and fadeaways, and this allowed him to get his shot off in pretty much any scenario. He could hang, let defenders fly by before shooting. He could adjust in midair. And he could fade away and create separation so that he wouldn't get his shot blocked. The common denominator in all these shots though is Jordan would always get to his set point before releasing. He'd hang in midair until he had his shooting elbow in and facing the basket, and his shooting shoulder was ahead of his left shoulder. This position right here, body turned slightly to the left. It didn't matter how he started his shot or which way he was facing, he'd always end up right here before shooting. And with the crazy amount of hang time he had, he would just hang out here in this position until he was ready to fire. This was one of the biggest keys to his mid-range success and his ability to shoot a variety of pull-ups, turnarounds, and fadeaways. Alright, his footwork and gather, how he gripped the ball and raised it up to his set point, his release and release timing. These are all the different pieces that made up the shooting form of Michael Jordan. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know what other players you want me to do a breakdown for. Alright, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.